folks, when it comes to comics, are either partnered with an artist or they get to choose an artist. But is there something in particular in the way you work together? Were there any tricks or tips or habits that you formed when you were putting together your stories and your books?
He laughs at all my jokes.
He tells good jokes. I mean, like I said, I grew up reading Jim stuff, so I mean, in a way, I could kind of see his, your view of the stuff that you drew. That's what I grew up reading, so it was kind of easy for me. I think we, gelled together.
So Thanos has had a very long history, as we've kind of hit on a little bit today, that includes fights with a number of superheroes across the Marvel Universe, from the Avengers to the Guardians of the Galaxy. In your personal opinion, who would you say is Thanos' biggest challenge and why?
Thanos himself. When I first met Jack Kirby, he told me that the Hulk was stupidity. The harder you beat on it, the stronger it becomes. And so I thought, if I'm going to create a character, it's got to have a grounding like that. And Thanos is basically appetite that will never be appeased. He gets to the point where he gains omnipotence, and he lets it slip away. I mean, god dang, his love interest is death. I mean, how much unreachable and unattainable is than a girlfriend named Death?
I mean, that's a hard girlfriend to please.
Yeah, we're talking major psychological damage here.
Ron, would you agree?
Yes.
So today it is nearly impossible. Like, we were having this conversation backstage, like nearly impossible to walk into a comic book convention and not see someone cosplaying Thanos or wearing a Thanos-inspired shirt. I know I have a shirt that says "I survived the snap." Did you ever imagine that from the pages of the Invincible Iron Man number 55 in 1973 that Thanos would have the presence that he has now?
No, because directly after we did Iron Man 55, I did Iron Man 56, which Stan Lee hated, and he fired both Steve Gerber and I from the front book. So at that point, I thought my career was going to be kind of short-lived, but Roy Thomas took pity on me and gave me another book to do, which he didn't think was going to last very long, and that was Captain Marvel. So it's worked out pretty well.
So we were also talking about the fact that you've seen some really amazing cosplay of Thanos. This is kind of for both of you. What has been your most interesting or most fun or most peculiar cosplay that you've seen of Thanos recently?
Thanos. I guess the last one we saw was, I don't remember what show it was at, but he wore the movie version of the Thanos, and he looked just like the pretty close to the movie version. That was pretty impressive. That was good.
But this is New York, the big black guy?
No, that was a different guy.
Okay, he was really good.
I see him.
But we also had in New York, we had this woman who came up, and she was dressed in the whole armor and had prosthetic chin that was just perfect, and she may have been the most ambitious Thanos I've seen.
I like the word ambitious.
Yeah, it's diplomatic.
It takes a lot of work to put on all those prosthetics and become Thanos. That being said, as an artist, Ron, there are some major must-haves when you're creating a character, you're creating an environment. What do you feel are some must-haves when you're creating the perfect Thanos story?
Well, for me, just drawing more of how he carries himself in the story. Because I always saw him as kind of, even though he's evil, kind of more of a noble, regal kind of character. So I kind of draw him, even though he's doing this nasty stuff. I kept to keep him as, I don't know, as calm and collected as he only cracks a smile when something really bad's going down. So I mean, other than that, he's pretty stoic and he's pretty serious. So I keep him on that kind of level.
And what about his environment? Because that's one of the things that has really evolved throughout the years is that from the 70s moving on forward, his personal environment has become much more detailed, much more involved. Is there something in particular that you saw and envisioned in how you expanded out the world of Thanos?
Admission time. I'm the most self-indulgent artist and writer in the business. And so whenever I got an idea, it got thrown into the story. And Ron and I have just had to live with whatever whim I've had ever since then.
What's been the kookiest one? What's been the kookiest one?
I say the pool where Thanos can look in to find mystical things in Mistress Death's realm. We've gone back to that several times just because it's weird and it's a good storytelling device.
Yeah.
That being said, were there any ideas that ended up on the drawing room floor?
Well, there was one point where I was going to have Thanos have a sidekick called Cosmic Cow and his sidekick Utter Madness, but we threw that one out.
There's so much more time in life. Please
I told you
bring
this was going to be a different panel.
So both of you, Thanos has been in comics, movies, video games, and even animated. What has been for you the most memorable Thanos moment and why?
Throwing Gamora off that cliff. That was bloody heart-wrenching.
I think I got really sad. Gamora is one of my
I knew it was
favorite
coming, but still I felt this tightness in my chest when it was going on. I went, wow. Yeah. I understand Zoe Saldana had to leave the theater when she saw it.
Aww.
Because none of them got to see the movie before it actually showed up at the premiere. So I can't imagine what that must have been like.
That was a very devastating scene. So, that being said, how has it been seeing Thanos on the big screen?
The last 6 months have been extremely surreal. Like I said, he's gone from cult character. My initial reaction was being puffed up and egomaniac about the whole thing. Since then, I've gotten some gravity on it, and I mean, I really have to thank Feige and Russos and McFeely and Marcus and Brolin and everybody else who was involved in that, because they've taken this little guy, this little two-dimensional character I had, and they've put him into the realm of Darth Vader and Moriarty and things that are going to last beyond me. They accomplished something that I couldn't have done on my own, and I'm going to be eternally grateful to them about that.
And it's really cool because I understand that in the beginning, Thanos was actually a skinny dude. Like, he wasn't, like, in the first concept, Thanos was not this big, huge linebacker of a villain that we have now throughout the comics and onto the screen.
Well, there's been misconception that I ripped off Darkseid from the New Gods to do Thanos. And the truth was, when he first started off, he was very skinny, and he had that visor, and if I was ripping off any of the New Gods, it was Metron. And, he looked we have some early drawings of him, and he looks very much like Metron with a scraggly chin. Like with a 3-day, he needs a shave or something.
So how did we get to this Thanos that we know and love to hate so much today?
Basically, when I showed Roy Thomas the sketches I had, it was actually drawings I got in my portfolio to get work at Marvel to begin with. And I told him I were going to put him in the Iron Man story we're doing. He said, plump him up a little bit more. And later on, Roy said, he told this story and said, if we're going to rip off any of the New Gods, we're going to do Darkseid. And that's where the whole Darkseid thing came from. But basically, I plumped him up a little bit, and then oddly enough, as the years went on, both Darkseid and Thanos started inflating about the same time. So they're both the size of the Hindenburg now, as opposed to what they were originally.
So they just both decided to hit the gym. Great.
They had a lot of bananas they were eating, that sort of thing,
So were there any challenges for you, Ron, as you're thinking about this massive character, particularly as both in size and in reputation, as it came to the other characters and the rest of the environment, and making sure that there was this perspective that was in the comics that was honored with the size of Thanos?
You mean in terms of other characters and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I kept him kind of Hulk size, I would suppose. So mine was a little smaller than the movie version, I guess. He's grown in the past few years, so not only just his musculature, but his actual size. I mean, they draw him huge in the comics now. When I drew him, I kept him more Hulkish levels, I guess you'd say.
He just had a growth spurt. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
No big deal.
More shoulders, less head.
So it's not a stretch to say that both of you do what you love, and you have made careers out of writing and creating amazing stories in comics. How did you both get into comics in the first place?
Want to take that first?
You mean how I just get into comics in general?
No, like as a kid, like because obviously you're a fan of comics
Sure.
as well.
Yeah. Well, for me, I read comics as a kid. I read like Archie and that kind of stuff. And then one day my parents brought home a Fantastic Four comic. I was like, what's this? It's totally different than anything I've ever seen before. And I was like, hold on a minute, this is not funny. You know, it's actually like a science fiction story. It was Fantastic Four, and so that sucked me in right away. I mean, after that, I was like, no more of this Archie stuff. I want the superhero stuff. You know, I still like Archie, but Marvel.
With me, I was raised in the cultural wonderland of Detroit, and so comics were my art. You know?
Detroit is out there repping for you right now.
I'm beginning to be able to see that there are people out here, and I see somebody waving about Detroit.
We see you, Detroit. We see you.
Right. So my dad worked at Chrysler as a draftsman, and he figured one of his fringe benefits was, at the end of the day, stuffing his briefcase with as much tracing paper, number 2 pencils, and masking tape as he could. And he would bring it home, and he thought he was going to use it on his woodworking hobby. Instead, I found I could trace comic book characters and put them up on the wall, and that was the beginning of my drawing. It went from pastime to hobby to obsession to a profession. Wow. And then I showed up at Marvel around 72, 71, something like that, just as a time that they were expanding from like 8 books to 20. And they were hiring anybody who could cross the state line and hold a pencil. And I just barely qualified. And I've been working in it ever since.
And it's a really cool dynamic, right? Because you're both a writer and you actually can do the art yourself. Is that a challenge for you when working with artists because you feel like you have something, like we kind of touched on it earlier, that there's something in your head? Or do you find it more fun and engaging?
I haven't done it a lot with other artists, but I've always come into it figuring this is a collaboration and it's not going to be what I do. I approach watching the movie the same way. It's not what I do, it's somebody else's. This is interpretation. And so when Bernie did his sensational but odd Batman, I loved it. I mean, Ron didn't do the surfer like I would do, but I still loved it. You know, it was just a matter of coming in with the right headspace, and once you can do that, and as long as they told the story. I've worked with a couple of artists who just couldn't tell a story to save their life, and they were just nightmares to work with because they usually came along with massive egos. And so, and it works beautifully, and you just keep going at it.
Well, Ron, we've heard Jim's pathway into doing comics for a living. What about you? Have an interesting story as well.
Mine's more typical. I didn't live in New York. I live in California, so I had nowhere to go to Marvel. So I just submitted samples through the mail, got the rejection letter one after another. It was cool. They'd say, close, but keep trying, kind of thing, right? So I get these Then finally, I started going to conventions and showing them my portfolio, and then finally at WonderCon, I got hired there by Tom DeFalco was editor-in-chief.
So is there anything out there for inspiring artists, for aspiring writers that you feel like hat tips, must-haves, or just advice? Because I know there are some aspiring artists out there right now. We have artists who are literally in the space that both of you were in when you were younger. Like, what would you say to them right now?
You want to take that first?
All right. I would just say not give up. Because, that's all I did. I just kept drawing, getting rejection, letters, whatever. But I just kept trying. And just keep drawing or writing or whatever you want to do, and just keep focusing on that.
My advice is basically draw and write everything and look at everything. Don't just look at comics. Please don't look at just the comics, because all you do that way is produce bad comics. If you look at other things, you bring in other influences and you improve the medium and the profession. Basically, soak it all in. And if you're drawing, anything you draw new, become